Russia's war on Ukraine may be stalling, but that didn't stop Vladimir Putin from staging a massive military drill with some help from his friends. The week-long exercise at 7 locations on land and sea involved 50,000 troops, Russians side by side with forces from China, India, and countries still further afield. The 2 Asian giants also get favorable mention in Putin's new Russian world foreign policy doctrine. So we're asking, Russia's war games with China and India, the start of a global arms race? Hello and welcome to The Point. It's a great pleasure to introduce our guests. Alexej Yusupov heads the Russian program at Germany's Friedrich Ebert Foundation based here in Berlin. Michael Thumann is foreign policy correspondent for the German weekly, Die Zeit. And Sarah Pagung is Associate Fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations, the DGAP, with a focus on Russian foreign and security policy. Alexej, the drill this week was entitled Vostok, which means east. Is that a signal to the West?
It is, but it's also the normal denomination of the final military exercise in the Russian calendar of military exercises. So we've had Vostok before. It's not the first one of its kind. It's supposed to be a show of force. I find it quite meager for that respect. It's a magnitude of order smaller than the last one. It doesn't show us any new maneuvering techniques. We don't see any lessons learned from the Ukrainian campaign. So it's supposed to show that the Russian Federation can wage a maneuver like that on the other side of the continent at the same time with fighting the war and maintaining normalcy at home, but it fails at doing so.
And what's the significance of Putin inviting a few friends to join him?
Well, again, they've been there before, but of course, the Russian foreign policy tries to portray the geopolitical landscape as one shifting towards a Russian dominance on the Eurasian continent. At the same time, if we look at how exactly the Indian, the Chinese, but also the other national contingents are integrated into the maneuver, it's also quite, let's say, weak. The Chinese have their own camp. The structure of the exercise is unclear. They don't have a really common enemy. It's about border patrol, so it's not a big, I wouldn't say it's a big thing.
Okay, so heavily discounted there by Alexej. Sarah, how do you see it? We keep hearing that the Russian military is under strain, Putin isolated, the economy floundering, but this drill wouldn't necessarily seem to indicate any of that, would it?
I would actually fully agree with Alexej. So what we see in terms of the scale, it's not as big as it used to be, but still we can maybe draw some minor conclusions from this exercise. So for example, if we take a look at the naval exercises in front of the Japanese coast, that is something that the Japanese government is very wary of because they actually are still having a territorial conflict with Russia. They also are facing growing problems with China as an emerging world power. So the cooperation between China and Russia is something that Japan really looks at in detail. So these kind of common naval exercises are something that is also designed to signal to Tokyo.
Russia's new no-limits partnership with China is not new. Michael, it was cemented, in fact, as the Olympics opened in China already before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But what was India doing at the party? What significance would you attach to the fact that Indian forces also took part in this drill?
Well, I think that was important for Vladimir Putin as to show that India, the other very populous nation on the southern Asian continent, is part of that new alliance, which basically he sees in terms of the rest, which is the majority of the world, against the West. This is what he wants to put on display. I found it very interesting that you saw nations like India and China and Russia there in a maneuver, and it was clearly visible that they were not an alliance, that you had rather armies being cobbled together for these exercises, whereas other nations, Central Asian nations who are aligned with Russia in a military alliance, were conspicuously absent. So this is what I found interesting. And
if I can just stay with India for a moment. China and India are not normally best buddies. Did it surprise you that India took part here?
No, it didn't surprise me, because India actually tries, like other nations, Turkey, for example, to take advantage of the situation. They haven't joined the West in sanctions, but they buy, for example, Russian oil at discount prices at the moment. Some of it they sell on to other nations, making money on that. So they basically try to find their position in a shifting geopolitical field. And that's why they have joined, but they are definitely not in an alliance with Russia.
So as we heard from Alexej, this was not the first Vostok exercise, but it was certainly the most international to date.
According to Moscow, 50,000 soldiers are to take part in the maneuver. That's significantly fewer than 3 years ago. But this time, troops from other former Soviet states, Mongolia, and even Algeria, Syria, and Nicaragua are joining Russia, China, and India. All countries are considered supporters of Russian policy. China has actually spoken of a friendship without borders and is committing ground, air, and naval forces to the exercise. The quality of cooperation between the Russian and Chinese navies has reached a new level. This increases global and regional stability and security. Western intelligence services are not impressed by the maneuver. They see it as a staged, demonstrative closing of ranks and nothing more, calling it strategically useless. But the question remains, is Vladimir Putin working on a new alliance against the West?
Let me put that question straight to you, Alexej, coupled with the question about how reliable these new allies truly are, China, India, and others.
Well, we have to differentiate. There is certainly a propagandistic attempt on the Russian side to portray the events on the global scale as a demise of the Western liberal world order. And then there's a lot of cherry picking on events and maneuvers, but also treaties and cooperation arrangements, which are supposed to be proof of that new alliances. I wouldn't claim to see any new alliance. There are cooperation agreements, obviously. And obviously, the other countries, including China, are looking at the Russian war in Ukraine and are more or less fence-sitters, because time works for them. They get discounted energy resources from Russia. They also, India, heavily reliant on the Russian arms industry, so obviously they still want to maintain this cooperation. And at the same time, they're not necessarily pushed by time, because Russia will become more and more reliant on them, not the other way around. So I would say what we see is a rearrangement of relationships on the Eurasian continent, and Russia is changing its role and tries to portray it in the language of a new world order. This is what I can see.
And let's talk a little bit about that new world order and Russia's hopes that their war has ushered in the decline of the West. The new foreign policy doctrine that Vladimir Putin has now signed up to outlines a Russian world that looks a lot like the imperialist ideology that hardline Russian nationalists used to justify intervention among other places in former Soviet republics. Sarah, would you say that the Ukraine war has, in fact, ushered in a new world disorder where might makes right?
No, I don't think that the war in Ukraine really caused new developments. It just accelerated existing developments. So if we, for example, look at this new doctrine and the quite great importance of the Russian world concept, that's something that is not new, that has been included in previous doctrines. But what we see is that this Russian notion of being its own culture, being the opposite of the Western one, also influencing globally with this kind of Russian culture that is growing. But that's just, a development that we have seen like 10, 15 years maybe. So it's just accelerating what tendencies have there been before.
And if I can add, it also, if you look into the doctrine, it uses the language of humanitarian politics. This is very interesting because actually the title is humanitarian doctrine. And what it tries to do, I think, is it tries to hijack arguments of humanitarian and responsibility, which we know from the West, where there is an idea that you intervene in a third country if something bad is happening. And what the Russian propaganda tries to do is to take...
Right to protect.
Right to protect, absolutely. The same as that there is a right and a responsibility to protect. The Russian Federation is in charge of protecting also cultural rights. So it's more of a propagandistic effort. I would still see it like that. Yeah.
Michal, Russia's war of aggression breaks a long-standing taboo that is enshrined, of course, in the Charter of the United Nations. Are countries friendly to Russia, China, but perhaps also Turkey? You mentioned Turkey. It has been making some rather bellicose-sounding threats recently vis-a-vis Greece. Are these countries happy to see that taboo dethroned?
Well, I think yes and no. Of course, a country like Turkey sees that geopolitical positions are shifting at the Black Sea, for example, to their disadvantage. But on the other hand, they depend to some extent on Russian gas, and they can, of course, benefit a lot from their position now as the major outlet for Russia to Asia, to Africa and Europe, and also from parallel imports and all kinds of things they engineer now through ports in Istanbul. So I think rather they really take advantage. They will not be in some kind, they will also go on maneuvering. The threats against Greece, which you have mentioned, are part of Turkey's pre-election campaign at the moment. Erdogan, the president, makes friends at this point in time with everybody who can give him money. From Greece, he can get only one thing, which is a conflict, which might then stir up nationalist feelings at home and help him over the threshold in 2023 when they will have elections.
So a lot of calculation on the part of all these different players. Alexej, if we can stay with the idea of an arms race that we mentioned in the title of this program. Turkey has been selling precision drones to Ukraine for use in the war, but says it will not supply Russia. Russia, on the other hand, is apparently now getting military drones from Iran. Is the Russian military, under the current circumstances, with the kind of opportunism that Michal just outlined, is the Russian military more resilient than many in the West are hoping?
Well, it's a question of what is the aim of the Russian military. I think it's absolutely clear that after the end of the Ukrainian campaign and the end of the war, which I cannot prognose when it will happen, the Russian military will be in a shape which is much worse than ever before in the last 20, 30 years. Just because of the losses, the technological damage, also problems with morale, recruitment systems, and so on. So judging by that indicators, it's a catastrophic scenario for the Russian military. In terms of resilience, if you're asking how long could Russia wage war, it could do it for a long time, true, by incurring more and more costs on its own military economy, the civilian population. At the same time, I don't have a feeling, talking to other experts specializing on military issues, that it's unclear what's the escalation potential there, because there's a lot of talk of, the creation of Third Army Corps, which is supposed to be used in the Ukrainian campaign. At the same time, looking at the social analysis, we can see that the Russian government has immense problems in mobilizing additional people. So armament, technique, weapons, tanks, the stockpiles are huge. People and their preparedness to go and fight and die, big question mark. Already now, the recruitment, even in prisons, is complicated. The recruitment in remote areas has been a big issue. And I don't see a lot of potential for the Russian military to escalate massively in the current setup of the conflict.
Just one remark on escalation potentials. I think the two possible escalations there, as this is They have really grinded in southern and eastern Ukraine. The escalation, which is possible, is a massive aerial campaign on Ukrainian cities, Aleppo style destruction of Ukrainian cities, but also at a loss, because the Ukrainians will be able to shoot down many aircraft, Russian aircraft. And the other would be in some way nuclear, but I think this is an option which is, of course, detrimental to all sides. And even with the nuclear power station and the struggle around the nuclear power station in Zaporizhia, it is a city located in the east of Ukraine. So if anything happens, Russia and Russians would be the first to suffer from that.
Sure.
I want to move away from that topic, which we, in fact, have talked about on many of our recent programs here on To The Point. But let's come back to this new world disorder, which is sometimes compared with a new Cold War. And Sarah, it's interesting if we look at the quite long list of countries that abstained in the General Assembly, United Nations General Assembly vote to condemn the Russian invasion, quite a long list of countries that abstained. Now, we had a non-aligned bloc in the Cold War, of course, but it had a lot less economic clout than this list of countries. What are the implications for the West of this fact?
I think in general, the image of a new Cold War is not really hitting the point here, because we have a lot of countries that try to balance the West and Russia and also China. So the big difference is first that we do not have like two super blocs like West and Soviet Union, but more actors on the field. And the other thing is that all the countries also across these blocks are much more integrated also in an economic way. So that makes it hard for a lot of countries to, to take a side. So for example, if you're, in Southeastern Asian country or an African country, you have economic relations with the West, but also with Russia. So if the West imposes sanctions, you're kind of in a deadlock, because you basically have to decide which market is more important for you, because it becomes much more complicated to maintain economic relations with both blocs. And that's also, I think, the most important reason why a lot of countries abstain from these votes, because they really have to try to balance for their own economic good, but also for their political outlook in the future.
And in fact, as you've mentioned, many of the countries that either abstained or, in fact, joined Russia in the latest military exercise have been getting cheap energy or weapons from Russia. Russia is using its abundant supply of energy resources as a weapon to destabilize the West, finding excuses to throttle gas flows, banking hundreds of millions thanks to soaring prices that are taking a painful toll on European consumers.
70,000 people protested against the government in Prague. Several right-wing politicians have demanded leaders radically rethink their stance on the war in Ukraine. Stop this war that the government claims is our war. It is not our war. Italian right-wing nationalist Matteo Salvini, a candidate for prime minister and a friend of Putin, has also called for an end to the war and Western sanctions. The sanctions are hurting Germany and Italy above all. This won't force Russia to its knees. We have to change course. The mood among many in Germany has also shifted. In Leipzig and Berlin, several thousand people followed the call of the Left Party and protested skyrocketing costs of living caused by the war. Our economic war against Russia is crazy. It's not stopping the war in Ukraine, and it doesn't hit President Putin or the oligarchs, but rather millions of people in Germany. Is the Western front against Putin slowly starting to crumble?
Let me put that question straight to Alexej. Is Putin, in the end, going to have the last laugh?
it's a chicken game, right? So, of course, we're looking at Russia and saying, look, the economic sanctions are going to hit the winter, the popular support will transform itself, the military, the shape of the military, we spoke about it. And the Russian side looks at the EU mostly and says, well, you're not going to make it because, you know, the yellow vests are still somewhere in the closet and people are looking at
Those were the French protesters when President Macron tried to raise energy prices.
Yeah, exactly. So the narrative is there, and then it's a question of an actual competition. It's going to be serious. But at the same time, I would like to be really disciplined about qualifying the protests so far in Germany because it's a fringe element up till now. The governmental response is there. Let's see how it works. And every bicycle activist demonstration in Berlin, as of now, collects and gathers more people than what has happened before at the moment against, well, in the demonstrations you've showed in the clip. So I would be inclined to say, let's see. It's going to be complicated, yeah.
Sarah, to what degree is Russian disinformation at work here, in part behind the protests? Russia has, of course, been pumping a lot of disinformation out, both toward Russian populations in the Baltics and Eastern Europe, but also to the West itself.
Yes, so we definitely see a Russian disinformation at work. For example, the recent clip of Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, where she stated that she wants to maintain support for Ukraine, no matter what her voters said, was used by a pro-Russian media outlet to really, target German discontent. But however, I think we shouldn't overestimate the impact of Russian disinformation because it only works if there are hitting some discontent or movements or opinions that are already present in the German population. So what we have to work on is resilience, also, societal solidarity. And if we make that happen and if we do that well, I think we're able to fight off the Russian disinformation.
And that kind of solidarity was, of course, the goal of the German government when last weekend it announced its biggest relief package so far, focusing especially on vulnerable citizens like pensioners, students, people who receive social welfare support. Misha, will that package be enough to stave off social instability? There are a number of warnings making the rounds about a hot fall in Germany, meaning street protests.
Yeah, well, I actually agree with Sarah and Alexej that I do not think that these protests will turn into something really massive and big as the fringe radical parties to the left and the right wish for. I do not see any. I see a Weimar constellation here as Die Linke and AfD are working together as the Nazis and the communists in the 1920s. Nice reminder of the threats we are having, but really at the fringes. They haven't reached the center of society. And so far as what I see in Germany, people are rather calm, and people also know what is at stake. Because what basically Putin does by the destruction, the deliberate destruction of the European-Russian gas relationship for good, it will never, ever be again like that.
Deliveries have just been halted once again through the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany.
Exactly, and that's once and for all. And this will probably, in the end, hit Russia much more because Russian gas riches are in the west of Siberia. They are designed to be exported to Europe. They will be sitting there. He will not be able to export it. While we are reorientating to other places, it will be expensive, but we will have gas in the future.
As we said, Putin's playing for time. How long will German support for Ukraine hold if it becomes really painful this winter when gas prices keep going up?
Depends very much on the government. If they run after every person who says something, I think the government so far has stayed course. So I could imagine that throughout the winter they will be able to stay course and not change their attitude on Ukraine.
And Alexej, same question as to timing. When will Western sanctions really begin to bite in Russia?
They have, but it's, someone said it in a very nice way. It's not a bite of a cobra, but it's a boa what is strangulating Russian economy. So it takes time, but it's already there and it's not reversible. This is why it's a game for time, and we need to be cautious and disciplined for the winter, but I'm quite optimistic. Let's have trust into our society. I think keep calm and carry on is not just a British motto.
Sarah, let me come back to our title as we move toward the end of our show. We asked whether Russia's war games with China and India represent the start of a global arms race. Looking at the current situation in the world, would you say that the age of disarmament has come to an end?
I think it will become much more complicated to organize disarmament. So what we've seen over the last maybe 10 to 15 years is, again, a rise of military expenditure, but still it's way below the levels that we've seen during the Cold War. However, I think nuclear or also conventional disarmament in Europe, for example, during a time of war is nearly impossible, because that's basically a situation where none of the parties is interested in disarmament, because all the actors perceive it as improving their very own security. So I think really a disarmament would only be possible after we some kind solve the Ukrainian war, plus, and that's my prognosis, also at the point we have a different Russian government.
Michael, very briefly, what needs to happen for the West to win support for a revised, revitalized, rules-based order that includes disarmament?
I think what we need is trust in ourselves, and that we will make it through the winter, and that actually we won't get nervous that we work and live at 19 degrees room temperature. And I think there were worse times in the past than this.
So keep calm and carry on and show resolution. Thank you very much to all of you for being with us, and thanks to all of you out there for tuning in. See you soon.